Good morning.
Morning. Morning.
Please feel free to move a little bit if it makes it easier to see or to be faced in one direction. Welcome everyone who's here in the hall and online and in the yard. Our COVID life continues. It's very popular in our country today to talk about coming together, recognizing the deep divisions and wanting there to be some healing of those divisions. I think that's noble and important. We are very fractured. I think we don't really know what it's going to take to do that. I don't think we have a really good sense about what it means to bring about the kind of healing that doesn't undercut difference, but deeply respects and finds a way with difference, as opposed to trying to make everybody the same, to think the same, or even see the world in the same way. I'm very curious about what this means in a religious sense or in a spiritual sense. People who are kind of critics of religion will say, religion has caused all this suffering over thousands of years because people have different belief systems and they can't agree on something. I won't debate that point here, although I think it's kind of a cheap shot. But it is true there's deep division within our religious life. We say that the most segregated hour of the week is when? It's right now. Yeah, it's right now. Yesterday, my wife, Azza, and I were walking in the woods, which is what we do on Saturdays. Usually we go someplace and enjoy the outside of the cityness of the outside of the city. And one of the places that we really like to go is a Bryce Creek. And we like to go hiking there. And there's a particular waterfall there that's very important to my family. And so we often will go there several times a year. And so we thought, yesterday is supposed to be kind of blue sky. So maybe that would be a good day to go for a winter trip or kind of late winter trip. And by the time we got there, it was snowing, which was just beautiful. It wasn't the reason we had gone. We thought there would be blue sky, but it was really a really beautiful trip. If you haven't been getting out of town, I'd encourage you to find a way to do that. There's even an LTT bus that will take you up the McKinsey. That is possible with many different life circumstances, but it's very healing. Anyway, so we went to this waterfall that's very important to us, and we spent some time there, and then we came back down, and the water there right now is just gushing. It's more volume than I've ever seen before. The snow melt's coming, and a lot of heavy rains, and just this like the river is like this jade dragon, really in its powerful movement. Just feels so alive. And one of the things that happens when it's like that up there, and very common in the Northwest, I think, is a lot of waterfalls start appearing from the sides. Any place where there's a steep area, these waterfalls start to appear. And there's one waterfall that I'm quite fond of that's just by the road that's up from where we usually hike. And so I thought, let's go there and see what it's like, because there's so much water right now. And so we went, and it's just right by the road, so you walk in a little bit. And as I walked in, there was a fallen tree across the way, this beautiful waterfall behind it, and I saw that someone had left something there, like it was placed there. It wasn't like dropped there. And as I came closer, I saw that it was a stone. And as I came closer, I saw that it was a crucifix. Very nice design. And then as I got closer, there was an inscription. I thought it maybe be an inscription of someone, a memory of someone. But as I got closer, it was this very famous line from the Bible, which I have very complex feelings about, which says that God so loved the world that he gave his only son, and only through him will you know the way. And, being not from a monotheistic tradition, raised in a monotheist tradition, but later becoming Buddhist, and living within a dominantly monotheistic environment, primarily Christian, but other monotheistic traditions, and just a monotheistic mindset. Like when I hear that, I'm like, and I'm there at this beautiful, beautiful waterfall. And I'm so actually glad that there is a religious symbol there. It's very common in Japan, where I spent most of my religious formation. When you're at a waterfall, there will be if you look around, you might see someone will have left a statue of this very important being named Fudomyo, the immovable Lord. He's quite fierce. Usually has a sword and kind of mangled face, and is quite intense, and is associated with waterfalls. So you might see that, or you might see the character for him, special seed syllable character, like hewn in the rock somewhere or something like that. But it's usually very subtle. This is a big difference, I would say, between a Japanese aesthetic and Western aesthetic. We're a little bit like, put it in the middle. We want everyone to see it. And there will tend to be kind of like on the side somewhere. And you have to look around, and then you may tune into it. But anyway, aside from my kind of reactionary impulse, I was actually really appreciated there being some kind of spiritual symbol there. And thinking about this talk that I was going to give today, that I had already decided what the topic was going to be, it felt like actually we get called to this question a lot: how to regard my fellow spiritual seekers, or I don't even know if we can say seekers, spiritual people, religious people. How do I regard them? How do I regard their belief system? How do I regard the way that they live their life according to their understanding of what's most important? This is an important question about how are we going to get along? What does it mean to come together? If coming together means that Christians have to stop being Christians, that's not exactly coming together, right? That's more like, from a Buddhist standpoint, saying, "Oh, Christians, you have to stop being Christians. Then we could get along." That's probably not realistic, but probably also isn't really what coming together means. Even within Buddhism, we can say, "Well, okay, I'm Buddhist," but there's many different schools of Buddhism. And even within any given school of Buddhism, there's many different approaches to the way that might be carried out. I belong to this temple belongs to the Soto Zen school of Buddhism. But there are a lot of people, that part of Soto Zen Buddhism, that would listen to a talk this morning and be like, "Oh, those guys are full of baloney," and vice versa. And on top of that, in modern times, we're in a really interesting place because it's all coming at us at once. If you lived in a rural valley in the mountains of Japan or China or India or Korea or Vietnam, Southeast Asia, in these places, if someone said, "Oh, Buddhism," you say, "Oh, I know what that is." And what Buddhism would be to you would be the Buddhism that happened to be there, right? That's what you would know. And it doesn't mean there couldn't be any varieties of that, but it would be pretty limited. And then you could just invest in that. And there things are organized in space in a way that you digest one thing at a time as you would meet it. If you traveled, you would meet other things. Well, now we have this wonderful mind expanding and blowing and many effects of the internet, and we get all this at once. And even without the internet, we had books before that. So you get all kinds of books. If you go to Powell's bookstore, when I was growing up in Salem, I used to go up to Powell's, and there was a Buddhist section. I loved it. I was quite interested in Buddhism at a pretty young age, and it was like this big. Anyone been to Powell's lately? Well, lately, like before COVID. There's like a whole wall that's just filled. Unfortunately, the sutra section seems to be getting shorter and shorter. The primary text section gets shorter and shorter. The people writing about Buddhism area gets longer and longer, which I have a little bone to pick with that. But it's really, we're getting all this stuff at once. Right? That's different than it's ever been before. So what do we do with that? How do we regard these different traditions? Both traditions that seem very outside of our own way of thinking or practicing, but also the traditions which are very close to us, but there's a big variety. We have our own proclivity. So do I just take that? Do I just take what I like? Well, we know within Buddhist teachings that if we only take what we like, if we're always just grabbing what we like, that usually heads to some troubles, right? We craft a little castle of our likes, and then that is going to get challenged in some way. That's not totally bad, but it also has some real limitations. Or the other strategy that we might use is, do we say that they're all the same? Right? Deep down, aren't they all saying the same thing? Like that kind of mindset. I remember when I moved back from Japan and they wanted me so bad to say that Japanese people deep down are the same as American people. Say, well, aren't Japanese people deep down? Aren't they just like us? And I'd say, no. You can ask my wife, she's Japanese, we work on this all the time. And they'd say, no, I don't think you understand me. I mean, like really deep down in. Like really, really deep down in. Don't you think we're all the same? And I'd say, nope. And actually, I don't want us to be the same. I don't even think you're the same as me. Like, why would I want that? Why would I want us to be the same? What does that give me? Well, I would say part of what it gives me is it gives me power. It gives me power to say, oh, you must be this way because I see the world this way. There's a real bait and switch there on the universal, right? When you can call something universal, it usually means now you can gain upper hand in the power. Or if you can essentialize it, if you can say this is what's really essential about it, then you get to start controlling something. I think in many ways it's a kind of power move. And I would say furthermore, so much of what we pass off as ecumenical or interfaith now is quite sloppy in this regard. When I would I haven't been to interfaith gatherings for a while, but I really always appreciate them. And I'd so appreciate the people that I would meet with. But sooner or later it would come up and be like, well, we're all worshiping the same God, though, really. I know you're Muslim and you're Jewish and you're Christian. Those were the main, there might be a Baha'i or something like that. But it's really the same God. And I always raise my hand and they'd say, oh, we forgot about the Buddhists. They don't believe in God. And I'd say, it's not that I don't believe in God. I just don't really care if there's a God. It's not the point, right? And I kind of like to say it that way too, because I wanted to shake up the group a little bit, and then we would have some fun conversations. So it was really fun. And so I think that even among people who are doing interfaith work very well, and there are many people who are doing that very well, there is a tendency for us to look at that and just kind of go, oh, okay, good. There's interfaith people who are doing it well. That means we're all the same, deep down. Right? And so I want to challenge that a little bit. I want to invite you into another way of thinking about this. Right here in the jaws of birth and death, what will you rely on? Say that again. Right here in the jaws of birth and death, which make no mistake, that's where you are. Right? You are right there in those jaws. To give a kind of like a vague answer about, everything being sort of vaguely interrelated with each other is not going to help you. It might comfort you slightly, but it won't point out a path. It won't point out a way to live. It won't point you to a possibility of liberation from suffering. And as it turns out within the Buddhist tradition, this has been dealt with for many, many years. All of this different way of pursuing the Buddhist path, of the Buddhist teaching. How should we regard it? I think all religious traditions have worked with this in some way, and Buddhism has worked with it in its way. The most common division of the teachings is called the threefold division of the teachings, or sometimes a fourfold division of the teachings. Depends on which division of the teaching you are talking from. So usually we talk about the Shavaka Path. This is a Mahayana, a great vehicle teaching, which I'll talk a little bit as we go along here. But there's the Shavaka Path. That means a listener. And the Shavaka Path are those who listen to the Buddha directly and then followed his teaching, and try to live just as the Buddha lived. Right? And the Shavaka Path is said to lead to arhatship. Right? That's the goal of that path. An arhat is a being which has completely surpassed the clinging of life within the life that they're living. They didn't have to die, right? So within that life, they've completely released all the clinging. That's what's referred to as an arhat. The Buddha was an arhat. The second path is called the Pracheka Buddha path. That's called, the Pracheka Buddha means a solitary Buddha. So a Buddha that lives in solitude, a being that is very intelligent and in tune with the spiritual ways and recedes from the world and finds great joy in that solitude. People following the Pracheka Buddha path, or beings following the Pracheka Buddha path, they can become Pracheka Buddhas. And then the third one is referred to as the Buddha path or Bodhisattva path. Those are beings that are working for the salvation or for the liberation of all beings throughout all time and all space. And that path, sometimes also called the Bodhisattva path, leads to full Buddhahood. And then the fourth is a division that is brought about through the Vadriana traditions. And they will say the fourth path is the Vadriana path, or the diamond path. Right? And this is, so when we talk about four division, the only people who really talk about four division are the Vadriana people, because theirs is the fourth division. Mahayana people tend to talk about three, right? And people who come from like a Theravadan tradition, Southeast Asian Buddhism, stuff, they tend to just talk about Buddhism. And they say, oh yeah, there's people doing these other things, we're not totally sure about that. Now, the reason I bring this up is because this teaching about how do we encounter difference, how do we hold difference, is brought up in the teachings directly. And you have to know a little bit about those divisions for it to make sense. I'm going to read you a couple paragraphs from the Lotus Sutra, which is one of the central sutras of the Mahayana tradition, which would be that third path, the Bodhisattva path, the path to Buddhahood. We're getting to that time of life here. These are helpful. So this comes from a section in the Lotus Sutra called A Parable. So this is the Buddha speaking to Shariputra. He says, Shariputra, suppose in a village or city in a certain kingdom there was a great elder. He had many fields, houses, and servants. His house was large and spacious, but had only one gateway. Many people lived in the house, 100, 200, or even 500 in all. Its halls and rooms were old and decaying, its walls crumbling, its pillars rotting at the base, its beams and rafters falling down and dangerous. All over the house, at the same moment, fire suddenly broke out, engulfing the house in flames. The children of the elder, say 10, 20, or even 30, were in this house. The elder, seeing this great fire spring up on every side, was very alarmed and thought, though I can get out safely through the flaming gateway, my children are in the burning house, enjoying themselves engrossed in play, without awareness, knowledge, alarm, or fear. Fire is closing in on them. Pain and suffering threaten, but they do not care or become frightened and have no thought of trying to escape. Shariputra, this elder, said to himself, my body and arms are strong. I can wrap the children in some robes and put them on a pallet or bench and carry them out of the house. But then he thought again, this house has only one gateway, and it is narrow and small. My children are young. Knowing nothing as yet of the danger, they are absorbed in their play. Probably they will be burned up in the fire. I must tell them why I am alarmed and warn them that the house is burning and that they must get out quickly or be burned up in the fire. In accord with this line of thought, he called to his children, get out quickly, all of you. Although the father was sympathetic and tried to persuade them with kind words, the children, absorbed in their play, were unwilling to believe him and were neither alarmed nor frightened. They didn't even think about trying to escape. What's more, they did not understand what he meant by the fire or the house or losing their lives. They only kept running around playing, barely glancing at their father. Then the elder thought, this house is already going up in a great blaze. If my children and I do not get out at once, we will certainly be burned alive. Now I have to find some skillful means to get my children to escape from this disaster. Knowing what his children always liked and all the various rare and attractive playthings and curiosities that would please them, the father said to them, "The things you like to play with are rare and hard to find. If you do not get them when you can, you will be sorry later. A variety of goat carriages, deer carriages, and ox carriages are now outside the gate for you to play with. You must get out of this burning house quickly, and I will give you whatever ones you want." When they heard about the rare and attractive playthings described by their father, which were just what they wanted, all of the children eagerly pushing and racing with each other came scrambling out of the burning house. Then the elder, seeing that his children had safely escaped and were all sitting in the open square and no longer in danger, was very relieved and ecstatic with joy. Then each of the children said to their father, "Those playthings you promised us, the goat carriages, deer carriages, and ox carriages, please give them to us now." Shariputra, then the elder gave each of his children equally a great carriage. They were tall and spacious and decorated with many jewels. They had railings around them, with bells hanging on all four sides. Each was covered with a canopy, which was also splendidly decorated with various rare and precious jewels. Around each was a string of precious stones and garlands of flowers. Inside were beautiful mats and rose-colored pillows. Pulling each of them was a handsome, very powerful white ox with a pure hide, capable of walking with smooth gait and fast as the speed of the wind. Each also had many servants and followers to guard and take care of them. Why was this? Because this great elder's wealth was so inexhaustible, his many storehouses so full of treasures, he thought, "There is no limit to my wealth. I should not give inferior carriages to my children. They are all my children, and I cherish them equally. I have countless numbers of these large carriages with the 7 precious materials. I should give one to each of the children without discrimination. I have so many large carriages, I would give one to everyone in the land without running out. Surely I can give them to my own children." Then the children rode on their great carriages, having received something they had never had before and never expected to have. You can find pictures of this if you're in a Mahayana Buddhist country. This is like core story. You see paintings of it. You see it referred to in Buddhist teachings all the time. It's a simple parable. These goat carriages, these deer carriages, these ox carriages. Later in the chapter, the Buddha explains to Shariputra, these are all a symbol. They're all a symbol for the Shavaka Path, the Pracheka Buddha path, and the Bodhisattva path. There's 3 paths there. There's 3 approaches to the Buddha Dharma. Right? Each one of them has its own quality. It's like a vehicle that's like a goat is pulling it, or like a deer is pulling it, or like an ox is pulling it. But in actuality, what the Buddha gives each of his children is another kind of cart, something completely beyond what they could have expected, pulled by a white ox. Massive, fast, smooth, includes all beings. Notice some things about this. That the gate is narrow. Each child has to pass through that gate. Right? They can't just get carried through. Right? They have to pass through. But what's going to get them to pass through? Right? What did they hear from the Buddha that would allow them to pass through that gate of liberation? They each needed to be excited about something. They need to be excited about something different. They all had their own proclivity. They all had their own inclination. And so they headed for it. But in heading for it, they were all participating in something that wasn't different. It was actually something that could include all of their differences. Now just let that story sit with you for a while. See how it teaches you. Now, why do I think this is so important? Of course, there's an issue about how are we going to get along. If we could all say, okay, yeah, you like a deer cart? Great. Goat cart? Good. All right? I don't have to make them the same. But I know that we're involved in something which can align with each other. That's one reason. But there's another reason. And that is because liberation is through aliveness, not through the stagnation of an explanation, an opinion, or a position. All of these beings are trying to get out of the house, or the elders trying to get them out of the house. That's their activity. To stop and say, you seem to be quite interested in the deer cart, right? I think the goat cart's really the thing. Let's duke it out, right? Let's try to figure out what's the real cart, right? What's the real Buddha cart? Just stops you, right? It's stagnation. There's one narrow gate out of this burning house, and the Buddha is begrudging nothing. Why would we stop? Right? Why would we stop the aliveness of practice, the aliveness of spiritual engagement, to try to create that third-person perspective? Right? It's just so, stops the whole process. I'll give an example of that. One of the things that drives me nuts within Western Buddhism, or I don't even know what we call that exactly, maybe white Buddhism. There's plenty of Buddhism in the West that is not, that is ethnic, people say ethnic Buddhism, is equally American, equally Western in the sense that it's in the United States, for example. We have Chinese American communities with wonderful Buddhist communities, Thai, Japanese, Laotian, all kind of different communities which have a Buddhist tradition that's very much alive here in North America. But we'll hear many people who refer to themselves as Western Buddhists often disregarding the Asian tradition. Saying, oh, well, the people are very superstitious, and they don't really practice, they just do rituals. And I was like, what? Rituals are practice, right? That's within Buddhism, right? But we have crafted a whole kind of mindset, right? Within this subset, which I'm now going to argue with. I don't like the cart that they're interested in, right? But the thing I don't like about it is it just stops everything. And furthermore, it's a stagnation that's based in colonialism. It's based in a power dynamic. It's based in trying to be right and be in control of things, which is what white Americans have been doing for a long time everywhere, right? So it's tied, but the karma is tied back into that. I don't want to make this just a lecture about that particular thing, but can you see what happens when we start to think that way? We look at the field of Buddhism and we say, oh, I don't really resonate with this, with this Chinese Buddhism, and there's so much incense, there's so much going on, and I don't know, people aren't meditating. What's going on? I don't really feel called there. Well, you have a choice. One of the choices is to make an explanation about how they are wrong, and about how their Buddhism is not really Buddhism, to buttress your own sense of your kind of purified essentialist idea about what Buddhism is, because you sit meditation, right? That's not going to head you towards the gate. That's going to head you towards a more kind of stuck place of thinking about what Buddhism is about. Right? You stop moving, and you stop just living in the explanation. Now, that doesn't mean that we should just try to convince ourselves that something resonates with us when it doesn't. Right? What resonates is a clear invitation. It's a clear invitation to you when you feel something that resonates. I love that about the multiplicity of Buddhist teachings. It says, yeah, most of them won't resonate with you. That's why there's tons. right? They're not supposed to. Do you like deer carts, goat cart, ox cart? If you like all three, great. You can do that too. But the point is to allow something to resonate with you, right? And then to follow it. Follow what resonates with you. Receive in your own way that teaching of the Buddha. And you can depend on others to hold the other things. This is where I think this teaching really becomes something quite splendid. That you're relying on others, you're depending on others to hold the parts that don't resonate with you. Things you're disinterested in, and even parts that you don't like, or things that you think are wrong. Right? Someone else can hold that. I actually need to rely on other people to hold that. They're included. They're included in my vision of awakening. Their wrongness, from my perspective, right, is included in the vision of awakening. This is what it takes for a vibrant spiritual life. To be invested in liberation is not to say, oh, I'm sure everyone has their own path and they'll, and that's just groovy. Actually, it's much better to say, I don't agree with those people, but they're also included in my vision. Not just because I feel like I want to convert them, but because I want to rely on them to hold that part and then to meet it where I can meet it. And that sounds very simple, but not so simple. And it deeply affects the way that we practice, the way that we think about what it means to follow the way. It means that you have to equally listen to what is difficult to listen to, and allow what is difficult to listen to inform your own walking. So when I see that cross there at the waterfall, the part of me that kind of cringes is also asking me, what is true about this? What is true about this insistence that there is only one way and one God and one Messiah? Right? I disagree with it. It's not the way I roll, right? But when I face it, and I don't run away from that teaching, that perspective, now I'm building the capacity to be able to have friends who think about the world differently than I do. And like with really good friends, we won't always agree, and we'll even fight, right? But if I know that this being is my friend, then a fight can just be a fight, not a war. People will often ask me, why did you choose Soto Zen? And I'm very proud to say I didn't. I didn't choose it. And I followed the invitation of the teachings that resonated with me through my teacher, Keira Joshin Roshi in Japan. I happened to meet him, and I had studied in many, like not only Buddhism, but many different kind of traditions, and within Buddhism, within different kinds of traditions. And I learned so many things, but nothing had captured me like really fully. And practicing with him, I was ready to push in my chips, like that the end of the poker game where you just whatever you have left you push in. That's where I was. And so Soto Zen became my way. And the reason I'm bringing that up is because there's no knowing when it will be time for you to push all your chips in. or if there will ever be a time to push your chips in. It's just not the point. Right? For some people, there will be a clarity around that, and they can enter into a path in a certain way. And for other people, there won't. But regardless, all of the lineages of the Buddha's teaching are offering you an invitation continually, right? Freely, begrudging nothing, to practice the teaching which they're presenting. And so I'd really encourage you to feel for that. Whether you're a person who feels like, I'm just not likely to put my chips all into one thing, or if you're a person who has, listen to Vadriana teachers, listen to Theravadan teachers, listen to different kinds of Zen teachers, for example. There's such resource now. When COVID is over, you can visit these places. And I would say particularly, don't leave out the teachers and the communities that don't look like you, however it is that you look, or however you conceive of yourself. Don't just go in the hole of your own kind of comfort zone, because comfort zones usually are built on power and power inequities. That's usually how those get constructed. So go into those different places. It's very easy now on the internet, but when COVID's over, to put yourself in those places. And for some of you, that's what you're doing today. Right? For the others of you, this is the 100 millionth time you've heard me babble on for 45 minutes. Right? So this is the vibrancy of our tradition. It is lineage. The lineage tradition provides us something that is so wonderful, because here is a small temple in West Eugene, particular lineage, particular flavor, style of teaching. It's right that it should be how it is. It doesn't mean everything here is right. It just means it's right that it should be its own way. And we say we have a mountain wind. That's the Japanese and Chinese way of talking about the flavor of a particular, like a mount. The mountain refers to the temple. Every temple has its own fragrance, its own wind, So it's right that you have that. And it's right that people who are interested should go to different mountains and see different things and feel the wind there. So I just want to deeply encourage you in that way. And as you do that, again, some things will resonate for you, some things won't resonate for you. And that's good. That's good that they don't all resonate for you. And even the things that resonate in a negative way is also good. And pay attention to those, because you'll find over time that thing which kind of stuck in you in a funny way that you didn't like, it will come back around to have something to teach you. And in the meantime, the people who really resonated with that teaching, they'll just be holding it for you. Right? And then eventually it will bring something clear. We have time for just a question or two if anyone has one.
Hey Joe.
Hi.
Could you speak some more of feeling for residence versus comfort?
Yeah, this one. So when you run into something that you go, oh, and then you kind of forget about it, and then when you feel uncomfortable again, you just go back to that, and you kind of feel, that tends to be the cycle of just, where do I feel comfortable? When you hear a teaching and you go, and then like you can't sleep, I mean literally can't sleep, but also it messes with you. It doesn't necessarily mean that you feel like, oh yeah, that's it. Sometimes it can be that though. It's like, oh yeah, that's it. But then it keeps kind of pounding in you, and it shows up in surprising places. That's what I mean by resonance. And they can be very close together, and sometimes something you thought was really resonant, as you work with it for a little while, it was something that was really more about your comfort. But I also say, don't begrudge that too much. Actually, we also need held. We need something that says, it's going to be okay. Let me hold you. And sometimes that means just feeling safe enough that we can sleep a little bit. But then pay attention to the place where you just don't really want to face something, so you go back to that again and again and again. Yeah. I would say one of the places, I mean, you hear me rail about this all the time because we're together a lot, but the overemphasis on rationalism in our modern society, I just see that all the time. And things get a little bit hairy in a discussion, and then people just go back to like, okay, well, what's the proof, or what's the, let's have a nice linear explanation of where this goes, and our mind just calcifies in that place. It's a real powerful tool, but it also seems it's a powerful tool of ignoring something as well. Right?
I have a question. This
Sure.
is Tojin over here online. So I think in this fractured world that you talked about, there are a lot of people that carry their politics or their belief systems as religion, like the Proud Boys, which may, we're talking about resonating with other groups of Buddhists and different traditions and that sort of thing, but I'm thinking of the greater vehicle right now, and still allowing space for people that might be so on the fringes or so out there that would be violent or destructive, or can you speak a little bit to that? And maybe that's not what you're talking about today, but my mind goes there.
Yeah. So I would say the main thing is we shouldn't be giving them space. We shouldn't be saying, well, they have a place, so let's give them, my work, if I want to create a harmonious world, is to give the Proud Boys space. They have their way of seeing it, and even though I think it's wrong, they have a right to their opinion, and so I want to give them the room to have that, even if I think it's wrong. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about no space at all, like zero. You have to listen to them so that you can say no.
Oh.
If you give them space, you're abdicating responsibility and the vital spiritual life that is possible demands that we stay connected, not separate. Giving space is a way of separating. Connecting doesn't mean I'm going to agree with you, but it means that I don't back off. I don't say, oh, well, everyone has a right to their own opinion. Yeah, you do, and I have a right to believe you're totally wrong. And to stay present with that. What happens when our explanation becomes calcified, though, is we simply go back into our camps. So my explanation about the Proud Boys, for example, is just being like, lunatic right-wing men who are afraid of losing their power and privilege. I can explain the phenomena, and I think it's fairly accurate, but when I just live in that explanation, I become ineffective in finding the coming together place. The coming together place is going to come through something that's much more challenging than me trying to make room in my heart for that kind of hatred. I'm going to have to actually meet it.
Meet it like this. Meet it. Isn't listening to them even giving them space, or hearing them is, you said, not to give them space.
Right. What I mean by space is don't.
But listen to them.
Right, listening. You could say is giving space, because you're willing to receive. You're willing to receive something. But what I'm saying is we have a kind of mindset that wants to map out the terrain, and then giving space means like, well, this is your rightful territory, and I'm going to stay over here, and you stay over there. I'm saying don't give that kind of space, right? And listening doesn't mean giving a platform for, doesn't mean not responding, doesn't mean not continuing the struggle against the hatred and bigotry that's there. It's a constant response, and that constant response is what I'm talking about here. And we don't need them. We don't need, like, for example, we don't need the Proud Boys to make the world good. Right? Like, that's not what I'm saying. But we need them to just be exactly who they are, for us to be able to meet something and for there to be a transformation.
That's a hard one.
Yeah.
I'll have to listen to reflect on this a lot more.
Yeah. One of the places I think the shifts in our mindset that is so important is to move from thinking about things as stagnant to dynamic.
Mm-hmm.
Everything is changing all the time, right? And so once we bring it into stasis, right,
mm-hmm.
now we have a game that has no real solution. And so the kind of not giving any space that I'm talking about is not creating that kind of stagnation of explanation where now we're just carving out who are the camps and saying that there is a dynamic moving that's happening all the time. There's I wish I could remember his name, very eloquent and interesting man who was a skinhead, neo-Nazi skinhead for a long time, and in right-wing neo-Nazi activism and violence for many years. He was one of the kingpin of those movements in a certain area, and he broke out, and now he goes and he talks with people who are still in that world, and meets them, really squarely. I wish I could remember his name. If you,
I think his name is Christian something. Christian. Yeah. I think I know who you're talking about. Yeah. I have him in one of my notebooks.
Yeah. He's been on.
I'll go back. Yeah. I'll go back and look him up.
Yeah, he's been on the radio and different programs a lot. But that would be an example of a person who within their, the acute quality of their causes and conditions has not chosen to just fall into an explanation of what's happening, but to keep the dynamic aliveness of their life with regard to this, unbelievably harmful belief system and way of living. And he's staying right there. Doesn't mean all of us can do that. We don't all have those same causes and conditions. But you think about your friend or your uncle or your neighbor who is always, putting in a little dig about just A, B, C, D, E, F, just go down the line of the things that they might be putting that little dig into. What way do you face that? Do you just call them a bigot and now they're over there and you're over here? Or do you stay engaged? And that staying engaged means doing the difficult thing, which is to respond. Yeah. Now that part of that is like, don't be polite, be political. Like you hear that terminology. So there's some of that in there, but it also doesn't mean that every time someone says something, you'll be on it like that. I mean, just because you won't necessarily be able to do that, but also because there's a real alive relationship there. That's what we're trying to not have space in terms of the, creating that kind of distance and stagnation. Anyway, I think this teaching applies over into the broader, this broader thing. In fact, I think this thing which we're now calling a broader thing is all inside of the white ox vehicle. It's all there. The whole world is there. But I'm a Mahayanist, so it would be natural that I would think that way.